if AI workforce transformation is a thing, what is the thing? Like what is happening and how do organizations wrap their arms around that?
Yeah, what's happening is that there's really a complete sort of re-examination of where people are driving value. So yeah, I've stepped into a really exciting role at Salesforce, focusing on workforce transformation, which I know you've talked about quite a bit recently.
Mhm.
That's your buzzword for 2026. Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I coined that. I mean, maybe I plagiarized somebody. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, you just triggered something for me in my mind of
I
like,
don't mean to trigger you, Cole. I don't want to
well,
do
I
that.
mean in a positive way. Um, like if you were writing an entire novel, right, or a long, like a dissertation or something, you wouldn't just start writing from page one and write it through the end. You'd start out with an outline. Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Neil Morelli, Senior Director of Human AI Collaboration and Workforce Transformation at Salesforce. Hey, Directionally Correct fans, this podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively bring workforce intelligence and AI into the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, watch videos on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. If you're looking to build up your skills this year, sign up for the Data Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, where you'll learn key concepts from Cole's book, People Analytics. And if you're looking to hear from Cole directly, reach out to him at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Human AI collaboration, AI workforce transformation, the hot topics of 2026. You started a new role. What's going on, Neil? Tell me about it.
Yeah. Hey, Cole. It's good to be here. And yeah, lots of change. We're all being affected by it right now, and I'm definitely in that bucket. Uh, so yeah, I've stepped into a really exciting role at Salesforce, focusing on workforce transformation, which I know you've talked about quite a bit recently.
Mhm.
That's your buzzword for 2026. Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I coined that. I mean, maybe I plagiarized somebody. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do think it's a very apt buzzword for this year, because whether organizations like it or not, they are going to be going through that transformation. They're going to have to think through not just, well, how are people going to be using new technologies? They're going to be thinking, how are people going to be doing their jobs?
Hmm.
And how's that going to be different? And there's this really interesting interaction between skills, tasks, technology, systems, structures, and we all have to figure it out together.
Well, what does that mean? So maybe even take a step back. I know you touched on a few kind of hot topics, but if AI workforce transformation is a thing, what is the thing? Like what is happening, and how do organizations wrap their arms around that?
Yeah, what's happening is that there's really a complete sort of re-examination of where people are driving value for an organization. And I say that because the whole balance of what people are doing versus what a system can do, you've now entered this whole new sort of talent segment into an organization with its own capabilities. And it's really, really interesting because the way AI interacts with us, it feels so human. I know it's not, we shouldn't anthropomorphize it. It's predicted tokens at the end of the day. It's numbers and math, but it mimics human capabilities so well that we're now having to consider it as this whole new segment of the talent portfolio. And I just think that changes the dynamic of so many things. It changes how we interact with non-human systems. It's so weird to say that phrase, by the way, not, non-human talent or digital talent versus human talent. It feels kind of redundant to say human talent, but it is the nature of what we're doing. So it's, how people are approaching their work with these non-human talent contributors and collaborators, as well as how they're approaching their work together within their teams, and who does what when and why. I mean, it's really everything.
Yeah, I know this is not what you're saying, but one of the running themes of the podcast that I like to talk about aliens sometimes, and people who are read into the alien community like to refer to it as non-human intelligence.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like we're kind of interacting with non-human intelligence, i.e., aliens, all the time. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I mean, it's artificial, right? It is
Yeah.
non-human intelligence. It mimics our intelligence well. It's not the same processes though, and it's not the same mechanics,
Hmm.
but it does replicate the patterns in how we interact and how we communicate and how we think so well that it's hard to distinguish what's, the fact that we're working with a system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the first job I had in people analytics was actually a workforce planning job, but it got retitled as to workforce analytics, which meant that the focus was on the workforce.
Hmm.
And in that article that you cited where I said that AI workforce transformation is kind of the word of, or the phrase of the year for 2026, I also talked about work intelligence. So rather than workforce intelligence, which is technically part of my job title right now,
Hmm.
um, it's work intelligence. And so that work, I think you talked when we prepped for the podcast talking about Clayton Christensen, famous writer, The Innovator's Dilemma, talking about the focus is on the work to be done,
Hmm.
and work being the unit of analysis rather than the workforce being the unit of analysis. Can you do you agree with that, first of all? And can you talk about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think the work, call them tasks. I mean, maybe tasks is even too much of a legacy term as well. We're
I
think we're
feel like
talking about.
we're going to come up. I don't think it exists yet, but I think we're going to
Mhm.
come up with new terminology. I really do. I don't know
Yeah,
what it is, but it just seems like the words are not doing us justice, and we're going to figure out a new set of words that is more apt for the situation. I just don't know what they are yet.
yeah. I think the problem with tasks that I have is that it feels a little too rigid.
Hmm.
It's just not flexible enough.
Yep.
So maybe it's work units. That phrase
Yeah.
we've talked about a little bit recently ourselves internally, and so it could be work units. And I think work units are not a bad description of a job to be done. So going back to the Clay Christensen idea is that this is the action, or sort of the value delivery mechanism for
Yeah.
what people need. And that's a little bit different than saying, okay, your task is as follows, you're going to do this and then this and this. It's, subject, action,
Yeah.
verb, and then result. It's just a little bit different than that. It's not as prescriptive. It's more focusing on maybe the outcome or the problem to solve and the value to offer. And then there are subsequent strategies and kind of tacks towards achieving that work unit, which I think is where the workforce intelligence piece and sort of the workforce portfolio comes in, is that you can have sort of a mixture of approaches to performing that work unit to provide that value, and figuring out what that mix is and what that essentially that strategy is. I think that's what we've got to figure out, and sort of provide some enough structure that we can all kind of make sense of it, and it's not just so ethereal and so in the
Yeah.
vapor that we lose it, but at the same time have it be fluid and dynamic enough that it can accommodate and account for this weird kind of balancing of different approaches to accomplishing that same work unit. I don't know if that makes any sense,
No,
but
I think it does. I think you actually just solved it for me.
hmm,
I've been wrestling with this idea. So I've been in this kind of nexus point between IO psychology and economics now for a
hmm,
little bit.
hmm,
And I feel like it's not unique, but it's pretty rare. Not many IO psychologists have gone over the dark side, if you will, are really
yeah,
kind of cross studying this. And there's this framing of work, but also many other things as units in economics, which is not kind of a comfortable way of talking about things from an IO background, but I've become more comfortable with it. But what you said about value really tracked for me. So there's always been this concept of there's like value added work and then there's overhead.
hmm,
And I think what organizations are trying to get to, I don't think we have a perfect measurement mechanism yet, but I think what organizations are trying to get to is instead of it being work units, they're trying to maximize the percentage of value add units,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of things that are value add versus overhead, which will probably always exist in some capacity. And there can even be overhead that is AI. There's like AI overhead. And so it's like human, like a 2x2 of like human and technology. And then it's like value add versus overhead. And we're going to try to maximize the right hand side of value added units for both humans and technology. And that's really what's going on here. But I don't think we've created the right terminology nor the right measurement mechanisms to make that happen. And that's like what, everyone is going towards. But it seems like you guys at Salesforce are kind of leading the pack in some ways of trying to get that direction. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, I think so because it's a little bit we have more incentive and maybe more of the mechanics to measure value delivery in those terms because
Yeah.
we've incorporated agents into the mix and
Yeah.
because now agents are performing these work units or offering this value added work and because you have a cost associated with those, it's easy to kind of like aggregate and measure those at scale. Then now you have this as a something on your dashboard to monitor. Whereas before, a lot of that was being done by humans is intangible. It's hard to observe, it's hard to measure, and it's hard to quantify. But I think now we're kind of switching. I think you're right. I think we are switching to a little bit more of an economic model
Mm-hmm.
because we have those measurement tools now. We have that observability that we didn't before, but it makes it so that you have to have more observability or some sort of observability on the human side as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And you have to have equivalent observability between humans and technology, which has
Yes.
never been
No.
a thing we even thought of,
Mm-mm.
right?
Technology's always just been a tool in our hand. It's
Hmm.
the hammer that we're wielding to, build something. And now it's a partner in the whole sort of dance that we play to get this work unit done, which now encompasses like a whole wider set of tasks. So it's definitely moved away from just like the pure tool definition.
I love that we're having this discussion. You know, I recently wrote an article with Alexis Fink and Angela Lamathon, who both have been guests on the podcast in the past. And I think you had read it and liked it, but this is sort of we were more focused on like the measurement mechanisms and the transformative nature of how this plays an impact. But I think this dovetails well. Did you have any thoughts about that one as in addition?
Um, Yeah, I think you were basically saying like here's what AI will offer towards providing that value and what it can't offer. And I think that kind of defining line is something that everyone, manager up to CEO, all different organizations, they're going to have to figure that out. And dare I say it's the jagged frontier. It's not a straight line that's clearly separating these two things. You really have to it's going to ebb and flow and it's going to kind of change as the capabilities change and how our interaction with the tools change. But
Yeah.
I think just from from an IO perspective, it's really interesting to try to model all of this out because it is so interactive. There was I was just reading and kind of summarizing a study about how there were different styles of LLM assistants in this game that people were playing. So they either had a coach that was giving reactive feedback to what the person was doing during the game, or it was an advisor being more proactive, like, hey, go and do this next. Or it was more of just, hey, I'm going to autonomously do this for you and report back.
Yeah.
And it was the autonomous delegate agent that was kind of taking over that was actually performing better because it was able to see opportunities and matches that the human couldn't see. Now, there are caveats to that. But the additional interesting thing was that the coach outperformed the advisor in terms of how well it kind of pulled out people's analytical thinking.
Hmm.
So I think there's just these interesting interactions between the task or the job to be done,
Yeah.
the style of the model, and then how we interact with it. That it quickly starts to scramble your brain a little bit, but it's those are going to be the interesting things to figure out at each within each workflow within each function. So there's so much opportunity and work for people with IO training to really approach these problems.
Well, and you're doing I think a session at SciOp about this. What's the session about? And who are you doing it with? And how can people find out more if they're interested?
Yeah, so I'm working with Robert Gibby and Kate Keysodi on a pre-conference workshop at SciOp, and we are going to be talking about AI-ready organizations
Mm-hmm.
and how there's different sort of tiers of the maturity curve that every organization's on. Where I would say it's, more of a maybe an awareness and an initial adoption up to, hey, you're optimizing current workflows, up to you're transforming your
Mm.
workflows and your workforces as a result. So how are you ready for each one of those tiers? So we'll be talking about that and kind of looking through some of the readiness factors and giving good stories and stuff. So if you're interested in joining, I think there's still time to join that pre-conference workshop.
Absolutely. Might be sold out after this. Who
There
knows?
you go.
Yeah. Well, how did you get into AI in the first place? Like, you're an IO psychologist by training.
Yeah.
That's not like in the IO psychology remit, or at least it wasn't when you and I were in graduate school. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've always kind of been primed for this technology meets IO world. My dissertation was on mobile testing,
Okay.
mobile assessment tests, selection tests, and that kind of got me into tech and HR technology. And I've worked for several startups, so I've always just sort of been attuned to what's going on in the tech space. Well, um, a few years ago, I was the chief IO at Codility, which is a technical skills assessment platform, and we were talking about ChatGPT because one of the best use cases for it is coding, as well as all a lot of the other LLMs. So my job was to figure out how is this technology changing the way software engineers operate and the skills that are required, and then how we assess them. So for a couple of years, I just kind of dove into this space and just started to appreciate it more and seeing the potential. One of the things that really jumped out at me at the time was the citizen development. This idea of vibe coding. We didn't have the term vibe coding just yet when I was studying it, but now since vibe coding's become a thing, so it's kind of interesting to see some of those anticipations bear fruit and be a thing. But then I kind of took that experience and got into the AI training business with a business called Workplace Labs, and we were doing AI adoption and literacy training for HR folks and teaching people how to build their own assistant. So it was much more kind of tactical, practical, bringing it into your own world. And so that's, I think, what kind of prepared me for this role at Salesforce now, kind of thinking more at that enterprise level.
So, did your IO training prepare you for that? And what's the value of being an IO psychologist in 2026?
So yes and no. I think the IO training did prepare me to appreciate and understand and sort of know about the mechanisms that we're talking about. So demands, needs, fit. We're basically talking about that, where you have demands of the job and needs that people have coming into the job, or demands, capabilities, and how those all kind of interplay and interrelate to one another. I think IO psychology training really helps you start to break jobs down and know how to break jobs down well. That was important for understanding the skills implications and hiring, talent assessment implications of technology change at Codility. But then I think it was also helpful in adopting AI tools, because one of the biggest mistakes people make using these tools is that they give it too big of a job. They ask it to do way too much. So when you start to break that job down into incumbent tasks and steps and whatnot, then you have a lot more chance at success and better collaboration. So I think that type of thinking and training really plays well into this world and this era. But I think I had to supplement it with maybe an appreciation for product and
Yeah.
understanding. So the Clay Christensen, that's a product principle,
Mm-hmm.
understanding like the jobs to be done and what people are trying to do with value. Also just building technical literacy, understanding like the tech space and how these tools and systems work and how they're developed and how they're brought to market. And so there are a lot of other things that I think can give you more of that like vocabulary and that perspective that you need to work with these systems well.
Yeah, you just triggered something for me in my mind of
I don't
like,
mean to trigger you, Cole. I don't want to
well,
do that.
I mean in a positive way. Um, like if you were writing an entire novel, right, or a long, like a dissertation or something, you wouldn't just start writing from page one and write it through the end. You'd start out with an outline,
Hmm.
right? And it seems like the same thing applies to AI. Of like, if you're wanting to do a complete set of tasks or build an entire product, You don't just say build the entire product.
Yep.
You would
Yep.
say break down the steps for me. The funny thing about AI is it can actually train you for how to break down the steps before it needs to use the AI to build the product.
Hmm.
So it's interesting in that capacity of it can actually help you to write the outline before you write the book.
Yep.
Use the same metaphor. So is that a kind of a good mental model for how to think about this?
Yeah, we would always say in our AI training cohorts, you want to use AI to use AI.
Yeah.
And that is just it's a helpful principle. So if you kind of know, hey, yeah, I wouldn't give an intern the task of, hey, write this book. You would say, go and research these particular subjects, summarize them, do an annotated bibliography for me, or like go find illustrations along to help me kind of build up this point or whatnot. You would give it more specific guidance. And if you don't know how to get started with that, with a given task or job that you have to get done, then it helps to give that context to the model and ask it for support and ask it to help you break things down. So we would even, come up with custom GPTs that would help people do that and kind of employ these mental models to help people think through it that way. And I think that's just not that we're pulling on the how do you use AI well thread too much, but I do think embracing and understanding mental models and frameworks is probably a better use of time than studying and trying to learn all of the specifics and mechanics of, say, prompt engineering. I think a lot of, at the end of the day, if you kind of know, hey, one of the mental models is if I have a conversation with a model, I want to get assistance trying to summarize how I've used it that I can then take into another session with me. Or say, I want to take this sort of thought partnership session and get it to write a prompt that I can then use and apply going forward. So you can rely on the model to do some of that heavy lifting for you if you've kind of approached it in the right frame of mind.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like this topic of like AI workforce transformation, it's bringing together multiple topics. It's bringing together, traditional AI research with people analytics, with traditional change management, workforce transformation, and even things like workforce planning.
Yep.
What's the relationship and why do people that are doing kind of maybe legacy people analytics need to learn more things about workforce planning to be a part of this transformation?
Yeah. Well, I know that we see just a coupling and a close partnership with workforce planning as being really central and key to enacting the change that we want to bring. So we can study future jobs, we can identify skills, we can set up learning paths to get people into those roles. But at the end of the day, at least within a large enterprise, you need good workforce planning to say, like, here, business unit, here's how you should be thinking about it in terms of your location or your headcount planning, or where you want to start to shift people into these new roles, and how you do that. And ultimately, that type of thinking connects back to business goals and business objectives and hard dollars. So I think it's a natural combination and a natural partnership to bring sort of the experimental, almost academic rigor and thinking of redesign or job analysis or skill modeling and competency modeling into the world of business. So I think that's really, really key. Um, but I see it as being really important for IOs to learn more about this, because, to be honest, I didn't fully know or appreciate workforce planning. I know you've done a couple of
Mhm.
roles in workforce planning, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got into that field. But I underappreciated it at first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's almost back to this economics point where workforce planning is where the concepts of supply and demand meet the workforce,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And for whatever reason, the first time I learned about that, it made perfect sense. I
Hmm.
never took an econ class in undergrad or graduate school. I never knew anything about it. Frankly, I'd always gotten, you always hear these horror stories from people in different majors, and they're like, "Oh, econ is the worst." And so I was like, "All right, I'm never gonna learn anything about that." And then I got out into the working world and realized, like, I love this stuff. Like, this is
Hmm.
super interesting. And so just applying that and those basic principles and creating the building blocks of an organization, not just how it's constituted today, but how you want to restructure it in the future, is just fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it connects back to what we were talking about earlier around thinking in more kind of economist or economic terms around work units and
Mhm.
value and all of that. And so if you can bring an IO perspective, which I think adds like an important qualitative element to workforce planning. So around the proficiencies of skills and current capabilities and readiness and preparedness and maybe even engagement and motivation. Like if you could pair that type of like rich thinking with the economic toolkit of workforce planning, then you've got real information to think strategically. And this is something that is just kind of unfolding and emerging in my mind, is that I think from a workforce planning standpoint, it like the conversation tends to be more around like the finance component and
Mhm.
the kind of the economic
Yep.
implications of everything. It doesn't necessarily scream talent strategy to me. But if you can bring the skills piece and some of those other kind of qualitative elements to it and the economic side, then you have the inputs that you need for a strong talent strategy that can be more prescriptive and more proactive rather than reactive.
I think that is so well put. And the interesting part about it is it's like people usually index too much in one direction or the other, and you have to do both. You have to
Mm.
index towards the financial side, the headcount planning side, but you've also got to index towards the talent side. And it seems like people usually want to neglect one or two of the three of those things
Yep.
and just based on their own pure personal curiosities. And kind of similarly, like I realized like I should quit taking people's advice. Like the other, the other class in undergrad, that everybody told me, "Oh, you never want to take that," and I ended up loving was statistics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love economics, I love statistics, and both of those were things I almost never took because people are like told horror stories about it. So I was like, maybe I should just quit listening to other people.
Come up to your own conclusions, right? Make your own
Exactly.
opinions.
Exactly. Well, do you have any
Yeah.
do you have any impressions you want to do for us today? I hear you like doing voices and impressions, Neil.
you know, I always say that's my claim to fame, and then I instantly regret saying it because I feel like I'm gonna make a fool of myself. But yeah, I like doing voices and impressions, and I also like movie quotes, so they tend to be
Tend to
like
go
movie
together.
references.
Yeah.
Um, and I've got a couple of young kids, so we were watching Trolls 2 and Flula Borg. Do you know Flula Borg?
I mean, I've seen Trolls and Trolls 2. I do not know the characters' names,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
anyway, well, he's, the actor for one of the voices. He's
Okay.
the Yeah, he's Hickory. He's Hickory. He's like this, and he talks like this, and he gets very, very up in your face, and, he's very concerned with how you're acting and how you're doing, and he's just I don't know, he's just very, very funny to me. But, that's one.
Oh,
I
I
also
was
like,
expecting like a Robert De Niro, Al Pacino or something, but hitting me with the Trolls 2 reference. That's awesome, man. That's really good.
yeah, I should probably stop there while I'm ahead, but
Yeah, some people don't like that kind of stuff, but I like it and I'm laughing, so
there
that's
you
all that
go, there
matters.
you go, as long as I get you laughing.
But you had mentioned earlier about creating like custom GPTs. I know that's something that I've been probably shirking my responsibilities, but you've been doing a great job on some of the stuff we've been doing with the PSYOP and the CHRO Association. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so, I've been working with the Site Foundation. I don't want to probably steal too much thunder. This is maybe a little bit of alpha, but I know we've been looking at ways to bring more like IO evidence and
Mhm.
research to HR leaders, and so we're working on and planning to have some kind of HR related agent, or really more of a information retrieval chat bot that can
Mhm.
kind of summarize a lot of the literature and bring it to bear in a way that people can understand. So I think that's a cool demonstration of what the technology can do. It kind of exposes people to the capabilities of it. It emphasizes, highlights IO thinking and our value add, and kind of does it like in a more engaging way. So those are all the goals. We'll see how it all plays out in reality.
Well, honestly, the most fascinating thing to me through this experience, in addition to just creating something that will be of value to HR leaders and CHROs in particular, has been the ethical discussions we've had about intellectual property and who can utilize things and what is considered a ground truth resource, all of which I think are discussions that every organization should be having. And so to me,
Mm.
almost the journey of it has been the most insightful thing. And so hopefully, once we get past the alpha phase, we're able to kind of share some of those learnings with the world as well. But it's been fun being a part of that with you, Neil, and another group of just rock stars, frankly, in the IO space. I typically don't name people in the podcast who haven't been on, but includes people like Fred Oswald and some other names that I won't share right now that are just amazing. But do you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. Let's do some Cole's Corner. All right. So start with some rapid fire. First question I've got for you is, if you weren't a practitioner, a founder, a leader in this space, what would you have done with your career? And would you have been working at a Porsche dealership? Would you be selling things on eBay? What would you be doing?
Oh gosh, yeah. I think you're mentioning that because that was one of my earliest jobs out of high school was selling Porsche parts on eBay, and so I think I've always just kind of been drawn to small business and entrepreneurs and kind of people that are scrappy and all of that. So I feel like I would probably be in that category somehow, maybe a small business owner of some kind. Who knows? Who
Well,
knows what I'd be
I mean,
doing?
you've been one of the. I always like to say, like, looking for like good examples of who's creating the next generation of like IO powerhouse companies, and you've been an entrepreneur in multiple contexts. Like, what's the motivation there, and what like should other people that are IO psychologists be doing that?
Well, I think it's something that other eye psychologists should at least consider and explore. I don't want to generalize and broad brush people,
I want
but
to generalize. I think they should be doing it. All right, you continue.
well, I was just going to say, I think a lot of us in IO are I don't know, maybe a little more risk adverse. Like we look for evidence, we look for hard data, and we want to make very considered moves. And we have a very very well respected social or professional society and all of that. So people want to make the right decisions, and I think entrepreneurship feels like a wrong decision to a lot of people, but from in my experience, I have not been steered wrong by trying some of those paths and those avenues, whether that's joining a startup or a earlier stage company or trying to do something on my own. I've actually done a few different ventures, at least trying them on my own. And I've always learned something that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, that I think give something additive to my skills and my perspective. So I just don't really see a lot of downside. I think people kind of focus and fixate on the downside of going entrepreneurial, or at least trying it, but I have not encountered that yet.
Yeah, I can't reiterate that enough. And I also want to say I eat my own dog food, because by the time this podcast comes out, I will be making an announcement of a startup I am joining. So
Heyo.
that's exciting release. Just depending on the timing, I'm not going to say who it is yet because I don't know exactly
Oh,
when this is going to
I
come
have
out.
to
But
know.
that's going to
Yeah.
be exciting news. And it's there was a whole generation, academics to the side, a whole generation of practitioners that are IO psychologists that work for the leading firms that were founded by IO psychologists. Well, guess what? Those leading firms were started by entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've heard a lot of IOs complain is that there's not as many IO firms around for them to go and work at when they leave graduate school. And it's like, well, it's because there's a whole generation of entrepreneurs that are missing, and we need to relearn that skill and reprioritize that as something that is not only an option to you, but a desirable pathway.
Yeah.
So again, I'll get off my soapbox there, but I do like to say I love meeting people like you, Neil, who kind of practice what you preach, and I want to get back in the game again, if as they say. So
Yeah. You got to report back. Let us know how it goes, what you're learning.
oh, definitely, I will. Well, next question I got for you is, what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go, and why?
Um, I've never been to Asia just generally, but I would love to visit Japan one day. I think it's just one of those places that just seems so beautiful, and we have just so much kind of like connection to it in a way that would just be really, really cool to experience. So anyway, that's my first thing coming to mind.
That's
Uh,
awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one. If you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
Um, any character in TV show or movie. Um, I don't know. I have to. My initial nerd side of me just goes to a Lord of the Rings character of some kind. That's probably so cliche and so trite, but
I don't think it
I
is.
don't know.
Is it
It's
an
one of
elf?
those
Is it a
things that I just
human?
kind of yeah.
Are you a hobbit? Are you an elf? Are you a human? Are you a
I think.
like what are you?
I mean, who doesn't want to be like an elf? But I think there's something to the hobbits. You have to give it to the hobbits. They're plucky. They're scrappy. We were talking about that earlier. That no one sees them coming, and then they exceed expectations. I think there's something to that really calls to me.
An underrated hobbit principle. There's like 11 meals a day. It's
Yeah.
a
Oh, and they love to eat. That's another
yeah,
superpower that I have. Yeah, exactly.
absolutely. All right, I got one big question for you. The world is a really complicated place at the moment. We're undergoing a lot of transformation, which we talked about earlier. What can companies like Salesforce or any other company do with their talent to gain competitive advantage at this moment with humans, not AI, with
Hmm.
humans in a rapidly changing world?
I would say invest in AI adoption and literacy. I think that all the things we talked about earlier all come back to how well do people understand these systems?
Hmm.
How well do they feel sort of psychologically motivated and uninhibited to use them? So, by all means, like clear the path, figure out the governance, get the data, have the access, all of those things, yes, but people really need enablement to see how these tools interact with their day to day, what the capabilities are. Um, have the right incentive structures to use them. So there's not a simple, oh, let's just give people access to Copilot, for instance. They really need additional support. And I actually gave this talk not long ago, but I had a key message from a talk around AI adoption, and that was to enable your managers.
Mm,
And I think if companies can do that better, we know that when managers model adoption and they model using these tools well, then there's a much higher rate of the teams using these tools and can use them effectively. But when managers don't exhibit that, then
yeah.
the rate is much, much lower. So I think that's probably the most practical, simple thing that people can do.
Well, I don't know if it was on purpose, but that is an excellent tee up for our first What Am I Reading article. All right, so
All right.
let me pull it up really quickly. So I didn't want to make you overshare about the work that you guys are doing at Salesforce, although I know it's cutting edge and awesome and everything. So what I wanted to do is the first article I've got is about another tech company. So
Yep.
Kelly Jones is the chief people officer at Cisco, and she wrote Cisco's journey in AI workforce transformation. And I think she talks about one of the things that you just mentioned. So just a
Hmm.
cursory overview of some of the key findings that they found at Cisco when trying to roll out what they're doing in terms of people intelligence and getting people to use AI tools is first, AI powers better employee experience, which I think is a nice thing. They said driving AI adoption across our workforce. And one of the things that they found is leaders who use AI amplify adoption. So something that you were just mentioning. Another
Yep.
interesting point, flexible work environments support AI usage. Hadn't heard that before. So that was
Mm.
interesting. And then designing effective AI skills strategies. So most employees are learning by doing so, using AI to use your quote from earlier. And then leaders are needing more tailored support. Mid-level employees are seeking more specialized AI skills, presumably for the specific things that they're being asked to do in their roles. And then the last section is about building excitement around AI. So AI is sparking excitement already. AI adoption is growing across Cisco, and corporate guardrails are making a difference. So thinking about things like governance and making sure that people aren't loading the wrong data sets and all of that kind of stuff. But what did you think about this article about what Cisco shared? And I want to say, just as a PSA, thank you to Cisco for sharing more about your
Yeah.
journey because this is helpful not just for their own workforce, but for everyone who's trying to undergo this transformation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so many of those points just really click with me and just really make a lot of sense. I haven't been at Salesforce all that long, but from what I have seen, all of those things are definitely true, from the reskilling side to leaders that show excitement, model adoption, to seeing adoption be something that can be a self-reinforcing cycle where you have good experimentation, good use cases that then get shared and get uncovered, and then they kind of feed back to the rest of us that then kind of adopt them or use them, and then we discover some of our own things. So you have to start that flywheel somewhere. So I think leaders, endorsing it, modeling it, building their own AI literacy. Salesforce, we have this. Our team has been working on AI fluency and the AI fluency playbook. Everyone can Google it and take a look at it, but some of the things around, hey, yeah, you need people to use it and activate their access to AI, but then they also need that exposure so that their sentiment becomes real and becomes more positive. And that's something that we talked about in our AI training a lot, is that there are real psychological barriers that I understand that people get a little bit hesitant about. But the answer is not to lean away, it's to lean in to the technology. So all of those things really click with me.
Do we understand enough about why people lean away from it?
I think there are good surveys, and I think people tend to focus on the negative side to it. So I think there's been a lot of ink spilled around, um, the fact people are hesitant and resistant in some cases. They are fearful that if they use it, then they diminish their value in the eyes of their manager and their organization because it feels like cheating or whatnot. People talk about being over reliant on AI, so they don't want to do that. But there are interesting studies. There's one that I quote all the time, which looked at how when there was more enterprise level AI adoption, it reduced psychological safety among people. And when you reduce psychological safety, then you increase things like feeling depressed. You just feel bad about going to work. But the thing that mitigated that relationship was that when leaders are transparent around the capabilities, they support their teams in using these tools, then it kind of disconnects this reduced psychological safety. So all that to say, like, I think we need to understand more of those
Yeah.
psychological patterns and drivers and whatnot. So we do need more research, but from what I've seen, even though the headlines might scream, oh, when you use tools, you're more likely to be burnout, work intensification, and lower psychological safety, and all of this, there's usually an answer to it. There's some way to address it, and we have to do that because there's so much capability and potential with the technology, but we have to address the psychological side too.
Well, it sounds like the AI mandates that come down from leadership sometime about you must use AI or
Mm.
else may be counterproductive in terms of their impact as well. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I think so. And I want to say, I don't have the exact stat on my fingertips, but I want to say that mandates without that additional support and enablement just don't really fly. They just are not successful. Um, so I think that's a fair way of saying it. But I also think that it's something that you need to really understand and be listening to people as well, so you can kind of meet them where they're at, because everyone's different. There's no just sort of one size fits all approach. You have to understand where people are coming from. That's been one interesting kind of observation of working with different groups internally for me, is that every unit, every team is kind of on a different part of that adoption curve, so you take a different strategy and approach depending on where they're at.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting point here, which is like we've done some research about like AI data centers. And
Mm.
there's like two competing narratives that are going on that almost never overlap with one another. One is, you've got to upscale the generation of power and AI data centers. And this even has like geopolitical implications and like the AI race and how this is like a net good for economies and countries and that we have to go as quickly as possible. And then like local municipalities are having this separate conversation about like, well, it's going to make our power bills go up, and are they going to make us run out of water? And, what are these doing to the environment? And it's like the two conversations are happening almost in these silos. And it feels some way like that conversation overlays to the workforce and AI usage. And like we're saying, you either must use AI and AI is a universal good. And then employees are saying, is they trying to automate my job, and what's in it for me, and all these kind of things. And just today, which again, this will be old news by the time the podcast comes out, but Block, which is Jack Dorsey, who was the founder of Twitter, his other like crypto company or payments company, I'm not exactly sure what they do, laid off 40% of their workforce.
Yeah.
And most of these announcements where companies are coming out and saying, oh, we're doing layoffs and it's AI is to blame, it's actually not true. But in this case, it is true. They're
Mm.
saying this is strictly focused on like their software developers. And they found that the coding tools made their software developers that much more, productive. And so they're solely laying off 40% of the workforce, which is the largest layoff that percentage wise they've seen in the S&P 500 yet. And it is solely due to AI. And so, I mean, these questions are right to be asked at the moment,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. There's an interesting blog that came out that got a lot of press and
The
talk,
Citrini
which was
research one,
was that?
the Citrini research one about the 2028.
I know which one you're. Yes. So
Yes.
there's actually been a couple of blogs that have
Okay.
gotten a lot of like movement. That is one of them. The other one was Derek Thompson, I believe. We Know Nothing.
Oh yeah.
That was the name of the blog, and I think that is. I think that's probably the only thing we do know right now is that we don't know how it's going to play out. It could be in a year's time saying, yeah, every company is reducing their software engineering core by 40% because they can do XYZ. It could also be that they're increasing it by 20% because now they can do so much more with the headcount and the staff that they're unlocking and finding new opportunities in the market, new ways to serve customers, whatnot, and they're wanting to accelerate that. So we just don't know. And that's kind of a little bit of a cop-out answer, but it's probably the closest one to the truth.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That Citrini research one like demolished the stock market too. So that
Yeah.
was very interesting. I read it. I'll be honest with you. I didn't even agree with most of it, but I got depressed reading it. I was like, wow, this is super
And
depressing.
I think that was one of the points in the We Know Nothing blog was that when a blog post can just completely shift the market, just the vibe of the market, then it shows that people really don't know.
Yeah.
They're not focusing on the first principles. They're just focusing on, their emotional reactions to it. And
And if listeners, if you haven't heard any of this stuff that we're talking about, more power to you. Like you're probably in a better mental space than me and Neil. So this is good stuff. But well, let me hit you with the next one. One of the things that I really try to do when I bring on guests is I find a lot of interesting stuff in my own day-to-day existence. I have nobody to talk about it with. And then
yeah,
I'm like, oh, I've got this amazing guest coming on the podcast. It'd be the perfect person to talk about it with.
I
And
love it.
so I love bringing this stuff up. You've got a background somewhat in the selection and kind of assessment space. And so there's a recent journal article in the International Journal of Selection Assessment called Why Personnel Selection Should Target Job Performance and Well-Being. So
Mhm.
historically speaking, job performance, assessments for pre-hire selection have been almost exclusively focused on can you select for job performance before someone is hired. And in this new article, these international researchers focus on selecting candidates for performance, but also targeting things like well-being alongside that. And so they're looking for things like ethical responsibility, legal and economic drivers, performance not equating to well-being, active applicants versus candidates that are passively assessed,
Hmm.
and sustainable hiring. Did you get a chance to read this one? And if so, what did you think about it based on kind of your experience in the assessment space as well?
So I didn't get a chance to read it fully or really like sit and stew on it, but I did see it. I did sort of it did kind of cross my screen and thought about it. That I really see where they're coming from. I think if at the end of the day, the IO term is expanding the criterion space, right? Like
Mhm.
that's something that we should do and could do with this kind of thinking. I my just kind of one of my knee-jerk reactions is to think, well, is some of that well-being already encompassed by the performance dimension? Are we already accounting for it, or do we need to model it separately? Is there you know collinearity there? Is there redundancy there that we don't really doesn't really offer us much? That would be one of my first questions. I don't know if they address that. Did they talk about anything like that? They're able
Oh,
to.
you got it, man. This is directionally correct. We don't read articles. We read headlines, right? We judge books by their cover.
By their cover, yeah,
Yes.
nice. By the abstract.
So
Yeah.
this is good stuff. I do want to point out a few things. First of all, I love the drop of multicollinearity. I don't think
Oh, hey, there you go.
we've touched that word in a while on the podcast, so well done. Um, when you are not selecting for one thing and you start to select for multiple things, one thing that comes into play that I don't think these authors really address, because I think it's awesome. Like if you're going to select for performance, yeah, absolutely add tag well-being on there too. Like that sounds awesome. But you also have to think about you have multiple competing objectives right now. And when
Hmm.
you have multiple competing objectives, what do you maximize for? And I don't think that they necessarily address that within this research, because are you going to get to the point where you have a compensatory model where somebody is like 99th percentile in well-being and first
Mm.
percentile in job performance, and is that an ideal outcome? I don't think necessarily so, right?
Hmm.
And so they don't really it sounds good in theory, but in practice I think it's a little bit more complicated. And the other thing that I think about in relationship to this is it legally defensible? There's a lot
Hmm.
of really good laws that go into say that job relatedness, which is where
Hmm.
what's upstream of job performance, is the reason why these pre-hire assessments are legally valid, and why things like the eightfold lawsuit, which we've covered recently on a podcast, is legally probably on dicey ground. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Don't sue me eightfold. But that's something that's being litigated as we speak, but it's probably on more dicey legal territories because it lacks job relatedness. And what they, I think, fail to address here is well-being job related? I'm sure there are probably instances where that's true, but you probably need a good job analysis to determine that. And I don't know if they necessarily advocate for this. And so one of the things I try to do is to give like a good faith argument for why something is a good idea, but also give a good faith criticism of it too.
Hmm.
So I think that this is a really interesting and provocative and novel notion that they're putting forward, but I also think that they need to be prepared for the logical criticisms that come from it too. So what do you
Yeah.
think about all that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I would also add that as an assessment practitioner or leader, I would really want to make sure I understand what the predictors of well-being are and that they don't start to drift into this. It's almost like a medical examination, which we
Yep.
know is just completely out of bounds and not appropriate. So that's where I might, because if you're kind of predicting well-being, well,
Mhm.
there's definitional kind of ambiguity there as
And
well.
what
But
predicts well-being, you know?
and what predicts well-being, and are those predict like, I know you're getting back to the job relatedness piece, but
Yep.
that's where I would raise a red flag potentially if someone said, "Oh, we're predicting well-being with these kinds of dimensions or these
Sure.
kinds of predictors." Yeah.
And what if we find out that, low socioeconomic status predicts low well-being or something along
Mm,
those lines? Are we now discriminating across low socioeconomic status or something along those lines? And is well-being actually a leading indicator, or is it a lagging indicator of other things?
mm,
And they don't adjudicate a lot of these things in the article. So I think, again, I love to give kudos where like
yeah.
somebody's introducing a new novel idea, but I also want to make sure that we're thinking about this, thoroughly when we introduce it as well.
One more quick thought is I do think that there's a world where we need to predict the what is it called? Not the maximal performance, but the typical performance,
Yeah.
right? And I think the well-being piece does play into the typical performance. Is it sustainable? Like you can like see what people can possibly do on we had coding
Yeah.
assessments. What's your sort of maximum ability to solve this coding problem? But with AI too, we know about work intensification, and we know that you have to find some kind of sustainable means of
Yeah.
working. And so maybe it makes sense to incorporate something like that if it's done right.
That's such a good point too. I think that's one of the things that graduate students don't realize before they've had like a quote unquote real job is how much of work is just, is it okay when you walk down the hallway, like, is somebody cool to like make small talk?
Hmm.
Like how much of like your performance review is just like, are you the person people would like to go get coffee with or not? Right.
Mm.
And those
Yeah.
things like well-being is a component of that. Absolutely. And like a lot of companies talk about like having a no assholes policy, those kind of things in terms of their
Hmm.
hiring. And so they are interrelated. So it's not like there's no efficacy there. And that is something that probably is quote unquote job related. Right.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it's just an interesting topic. So I love that you
We,
brought up that point.
we've definitely hit the grad school bingo, because I was just about to say counterproductive work behaviors as well. I was
Mhm.
going to throw that out there. That might be the last one on our bingo card, but
There we
you know,
go.
we've considered that in the space for a while. We don't have good measures of it. Maybe the flip side of it is another way to look at that component, but um, yeah, it's a measurement problem, I think, at the end of the day.
It's like, how many times a week can we talk about the weather with a stranger? It's like, well,
Yeah.
that's a big part of job performance. I hate to break it to you.
Hmm.
Well, anyway, let's move on to the last one really quick. So, recent article called "The Impact of Generative AI Adoption on Organizational Networks: Evidence from a Field Experiment," and this comes from INSEAD, the European Business School, a working paper that they've gotten. But Alexis Fink made a post about this. There's a lot of speculation about how AI will impact work, who will benefit, and how much and under what circumstances. But this new research paper talks about in an experiment about how they introduced a generative AI assistant into the workplace and had a control and experimental group to compare the differences between those two. And some of the things that they found is that those who work that work inherently involves integrating diverse inputs and coordinating across boundaries, and with leveraging AI to achieve greater productivity outputs. And so generative AI likely augmented generalists' ability to coordinate and synthesize information, creating synergy between enhanced collaboration and individual effort that translated into higher project completion. So essentially, the experimental group that used AI was more productive than the group that did not use AI. What did you think about this article? And I've seen other studies to this effect, but most of them don't have a true control and experimental group and aren't based in a true kind of. They're more of like a case study than a true scientific explanation of it. So what did you think about this one?
Well, uh, this reminds me of the article I mentioned earlier about the game having different AI assistants in a game
Yeah.
scenario. And the cool thing about that kind of experimental approach is that they did within subjects, they can isolate the effect of giving a certain type of assistant for a certain type of task. But I mean, all of that just reduces how generalizable the findings are, right? So I think that's probably my first reaction to something like that is how well can you pull the findings out of the lab here? How well do they apply? Um, Beyond that, though, a couple of the things you said in the abstract around coordination and collaboration, that speaks to me, and I've become more of a fan and more of a follower of Sanjit Paul Chowdhury. Do you know? Have you
Mm,
ever heard of Sanjit Paul Chowdhury?
I
He
heard that.
has this book called Reshuffle, and he's sort of a writer thinker in the AI space, and he says that the reason that AI will unlock new capability, kind of new value, is because of the collaboration effect, because it can help coordinate and collaborate sort of disunified actors in a better way. So you have people in design and in marketing and in product and in engineering. Well, the AI can help coordinate those actors in a much more cohesive way so that they can collectively offer a better service. And he uses several analogies to make that
Mhm.
case. But it sounds like that's what this article is getting at. And I would be curious to look at the details a little bit to see if there is something to that collaboration and coordination effect within the group that performed better with AI, because it's sort
Mhm.
of the lingua franca that they can use to do more collective work
Yeah.
better together.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why they looked at it from a network analysis lens, not just a
Mm,
productivity and output lens. And they obviously found that, it does tend to help generalists more than specialists. But
mm.
I think those linkages from a network analysis standpoint are apt in this situation. But it's been fantastic having you on as a guest today. Anything you want to chat with me about today? I wasn't sure if you had any topics or not. Um,
Well, I know maybe you posted it. Maybe I'm imagining this, but there's been a thread that's gone around saying I think it was a Reddit thread that said, "Oh, the analytics that the AI has been doing are completely wrong, and someone's going to get fired because of it." Did you see that one?
I have seen that post. That was hilarious.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Well, first of all, I have not dug into like that could be made up too, right? A
Yeah,
lot of the stuff in this
it's
space
Reddit, right?
is kind
Yeah,
of clickbait, but it is interesting in the sense that I don't know if if you had to diagnose it, is it that they gave the AI the wrong inputs and therefore it came to the wrong conclusions? Or they gave AI the right inputs and the AI just generated the wrong output? Or is it user error? Or, and here's the other thing that I never saw this reaction to it, which I thought was the funniest thing is how many times when humans created output were they systematically wrong for 3 months or 6 months? And then that
totally.
went up to the board and there was damage control that went on there as well. And is it just human error that would have generated this if humans had done it that led to AI doing it wrong too? I think I think people don't understand like a lot of the numbers that get shared that you see out in public are either wrong or made up. And you just kind of
Hmm.
have to come to terms with that. And it actually goes back to the name of the podcast that is directionally correct is like, is directionally the best thing you can ever hope for?
Mm.
Because otherwise, like who knows? Like we've talked about the replication crisis a lot on here. That a lot of the scientific findings that you find in journals fall victim to p hacking and harking and all those things. And again, one of our most famous episodes was with Dr. Marcus Crede, where he said up to a third of academic research is outright fraud. It's like, okay, so can you trust it? Can you
Mm.
trust the findings that you get from AI? Can you trust the findings you get from your analysts that go all the way up to the board, that get reported to Wall Street? Can you trust any of it? And so there's like almost this like existential crisis you have when it goes to that. And so again, I think what I have come to peace with is like directionally correct is as good as it gets. But I don't know.
Mm.
Do you have any thoughts on that Reddit post as well?
So you mentioned several things. I don't think we have time to unpack all of them, but I will say I'm trying to check my own confirmation bias around a working sort of expectation or hypothesis in my mind is that job expertise will
Mhm.
still matter in the AI era because of some of the things that you just mentioned. So one is the ability to evaluate and to really, quality control outputs and to check things, but then also the accountability of it. I think that's the difference here. Yes, people are wrong. Yes, people are just, we need to really be mindful of who we're comparing AI to at the end of the day. But AI is not accountable. We still need that accountability, which I think is a role that experts will still play. I also saw the article that you posted about, I think Claude and
Yeah.
Excel being awesome, and I really liked that post. And I was just thinking, oh man, will this give people analytics folks hives because it sounds like everyone can do this kind of work. But I think that the takeaway to me, in line with what we just said, is that there still be a need for expertise for those reasons, even if we can democratize access to some of the methods
Yeah.
and all of that.
Well, the interesting part about that one, first of all, like I don't think you were the only person who noticed. Like I think that Reddit post and my post came out like the same day. And so it was sort of ironic that they were like right on top of each other. But the other thing is like you really could just go into Excel and check all the formulas. Like they're there.
Mm.
Like that was
Hmm.
the thing I didn't expect when I posted it. I expected it to generate a bunch of output and then I couldn't check the results. But the reality was I could check all the results because it literally had a bunch instead of it outputting a bunch of Python code or something else that to the layperson is just almost completely inaccessible. Most people have some Excel fluency nowadays, and so you
Hmm.
can literally just go look at the formulas. And again, it's just creating a bunch of pivot tables and long, if then statements within the Excel. And I was like, okay, this is actually pretty neat. And the other thing is, I don't think anybody knew about this for the most part. I haven't seen anybody talking about the Claude plugin, and so I was like, if there were ever kind of a phase shift moment where the normies, quote unquote, would be able to start using AI, this is one of those moments.
Hmm. And what can what I guess the experts do with that
Yeah,
new capability? Like how much faster can you do? How much more can you push it to new outputs and production and all of that? I mean, how much more can you do? I think there's a lot more
absolutely.
potential there.
Well, Neil, it's been fantastic having you on as a guest today.
Yeah.
It's
Thanks for
been
having me.
seeing your career develop from afar has been fun because I've been following you for a while. It was good meeting you at JP's thing last year at SIB, JP Elliott. previous guest on the podcast, an amazing crew of people he had there, and just getting to know you a little bit better since then. But thanks so much for joining the podcast. Is there anywhere people can find you if they want to learn more?
Well, I would love to have folks join my newsletter that I write. It's People First AI, and I think we can put a link to that maybe in show notes or something like that. But
yeah, sure.
And then just connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to interact with people there. If you DM me or just mention me or something like that, I usually get back to people. So it's always a good conversation.
When say the name of that newsletter again.
It's called People First AI.
Okay, is that peoplefirstai.com or something? Or
it's peoplefirstai.news.
Okay,
if you want to find the website there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining, Neil. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Neil Morelli. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cole.